The stars looked different from here. Commander Taemin stood on the bridge of the Vorthak exploration ship Crimson Dawn, watching the yellow star grow larger on the main screen. Earth. The third planet from this unremarkable star had been sending signals across the galaxy for decades before suddenly going quiet 50 years ago. Now the hegemony wanted to know why. Status report, Taemin said to his crew. His voice carried the authority of someone who had led many successful missions into unknown space. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ship's systems and the occasional beep from the control panels. Chief Science Officer Jin A looked up from her station. Her dark eyes showed concern as she read the data on her screens. Commander, all our scans show the same thing. No life signs anywhere on the planet, no cities, no technology signatures. It's like the entire civilization just disappeared. Navigator So Young turned in her chair. Sir, we're getting some strange readings as we approach. There's debris, in orbit. But it's not behaving like normal space junk. The pieces are moving in patterns. Pilot Hyunwoo checked his controls. I can get us through it, Commander. But Navigator So Young is right. This doesn't look like wreckage from destroyed ships. It's too organized. Taemin walked to the front viewport and looked out at the blue and green planet below. Earth looked peaceful from space. White clouds swirled over brown and green continents. Deep blue oceans covered most of the surface. It was hard to believe that a spacefaring civilization had lived here just 50 years ago. What do our historical records tell us about these humans? Taemin asked. Dr. Young Sik, the ship's expert on alien species, pulled up files on his tablet. They called themselves humans. Bipedal, similar height to us. They had spread to several star systems before they went silent. Their technology was advancing rapidly. Some reports said they were working on things that other species thought impossible. Like, what? Janae asked. Energy manipulation beyond our understanding, materials that could change their properties at will, and there were rumors about experiments with consciousness itself. Young Sik scrolled through more data. But then all communication stopped. Ships sent to investigate found empty colonies. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty buildings and abandoned equipment. Communications Officer Haewon spoke up from her station. Commander, I'm not picking up any radio signals from the planet. But there's something else. I'm getting some kind of background energy reading that I can't identify. Taemin nodded. Take us into orbit. Stay alert for any threats. As the Crimson Dawn moved through Earth's orbital space, the crew got a better look at the debris field that surrounded the planet. What they had thought was wreckage turned out to be something much stranger. Thousands of identical objects floated in perfect formation around Earth. Each piece was about the size of a fighter ship, but they weren't ships. They were smooth and dark, with no visible engines or weapons. Sir, So Young said, her voice tight. With concern, these aren't random debris. They're in a grid pattern that covers the entire planet. There are millions of them. Security Chief Dong-soo joined them on the bridge. He was a large man with scars on his face from battles with hostile aliens. Commander, if those things are weapons, we're flying into the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy. But they're not active, Hyunwoo said, studying his pilot. Controls. No energy signatures, no movement, it's like they're sleeping. Taemin made his decision. Take us down to the surface. Choose a landing site near one of their major cities, but stay ready to leave quickly if we need to. The ship descended through Earth's atmosphere. The air was clean and breathable, which was unusual for a dead planet. Most worlds without life had poisoned atmospheres or no air at all. As they flew over the continents, they could see the remains of human civilization. Roads still crossed the landscape, but they were covered with grass and small trees. Buildings stood empty in what had once been cities. Cars sat abandoned on streets where plants now grew between the cracks in the pavement. Nature was taking back the planet, but slowly, as if it had only started recently. There, Jin-A pointed to a large flat area near what their maps said had been called New York. That looks like a good place to land. Hyunwoo brought the ship down in what had once been a park in the center of the city. Tall buildings rose around them on all sides, but their windows were dark and empty. The landing was smooth and the ship's sensors showed that the air outside was safe to breathe. "Sir," HFY said suddenly, "I'm picking up something. There's an object about 2 kilometers south of our position. It's giving off the same energy signature I detected earlier." Taemin looked at the tactical display. "What kind of object?" "Unknown, sir. It appears to be a ship of some kind, but it doesn't match any design in our databases. It's just sitting in an open field." "A ship?" Dongsu asked. "Human?" "No, sir. The shape and material composition are unlike anything we've seen before." Taemin thought about this. A strange ship on a planet where an entire civilization had vanished. It could be a trap, but it could also be the answer they were looking for. "Prepare an away team," he ordered. "Full environmental suits and weapons. We're going to take a look at this ship." An hour later, Taemin led a team of 6 crew members through the empty streets of New York. Their boots echoed off the pavement as they walked past abandoned cars and silent buildings. Plants grew everywhere, but not the wild, chaotic growth you would expect on a world without intelligent life to control it. The plants seemed to grow in patterns as if someone was still taking care of them. Engineer Minho stopped to examine a tree growing through the sidewalk. "Commander, this is strange. This tree is exactly 50 years old. All the plant growth we've seen looks like it started 50 years ago." "Right when the humans disappeared," Young Sik noted. They continued south through the city. The silence was complete except for their footsteps and the sound of wind through the empty buildings. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if the planet was holding its breath. When they reached the field where the ship was located, they all stopped and stared. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was about the size of a small transport vessel. But its shape kept changing slightly. The hull seemed to be made of a liquid metal that flowed like water but held its form like solid steel. "Is it moving?" Engineer Yunji asked. "Not exactly," Jinhei said, scanning the ship with her instruments. "The material appears to be rebuilding itself constantly. The molecular structure is shifting, but the overall shape stays the same." The ship had no visible engines, no weapons, no airlocks or windows. It sat in the middle of the field like a metallic egg that reflected the sky above it. The surface was smooth and perfect, without any scratches or damage despite sitting exposed for who knows how long. "Sir," Dongsu said, his hand on his weapon. "This could be a trap. What if it's some kind of automated defense system left by the humans?" Taemin studied the ship carefully. "If it's a weapon, it's unlike any weapon I've ever seen." "HFY, are you picking up any hostile energy signatures?" HFY checked her portable scanner. "No, sir. The energy it's giving off feels peaceful." "I know that sounds strange, but that's the only way I can describe it." As they watched, symbols began appearing on the ship's surface. The liquid metal formed shapes and patterns that seemed to flow across the hull like writing made of silver water. The symbols were completely unlike any language they knew, but somehow each member of the team found that they could understand what the symbols meant. The message was simple and impossible. "Welcome home." "Home?" Minho said. "But we're not human. This isn't our home." The symbols changed, forming new patterns. This time the message was different. "All who seek truth are welcome home." Young Sik stepped closer to the ship, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. "It's communicating with us, but how does it know we can understand it? And how are we understanding it at all?" The ship's surface rippled like calm water when a stone is dropped into it. A section of the hull became transparent, showing the interior. Inside they could see corridors that seemed to glow with their own light. The walls were covered with more of the flowing symbols, and the passages seemed to extend much further than the outside of the ship would allow. "The inside looks bigger than the outside," Yunji observed. "That's not possible." "Nothing about this ship is possible," Taemin replied. "But it's here, and it's real." A new message appeared on the ship's hull. "Enter and learn." Dongsu shook his head. "Commander, I strongly advise against boarding that vessel. We don't know what it is or what it wants. But we know why we're here," Taemin said. "To find out what happened to the humans. This ship might have the answers we need. Hei-Wan was studying her scanner again. Sir, I'm detecting multiple life signs inside the ship. But they're not like any life signs I've seen before. They're complex, layered. How many? Taemin asked. It's hard to say. The readings keep changing. Sometimes it looks like one consciousness, sometimes like thousands. The ship pulsed gently, and more symbols flowed across its surface. The message was longer this time. Those who created me have gone beyond. I remain to teach. Will you learn? Young Sik looked at his commander. Sir, this could be the discovery of the century. A ship that communicates. The ship's interior continued to change around them. What had been a simple circular room now stretched into corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls showed images of star systems and galaxies, but not just any stars. These were places that shouldn't exist yet, according to everything the Vorthak knew about the universe. This is impossible, Jinne said, pointing at one of the star maps. These galaxies are millions of years away from forming. Our scientists predict they won't exist for eons. The ship's voice responded with what almost sounded like amusement. Your scientists think in terms of linear time. When consciousness expands beyond physical limits, past and future become flexible concepts. Engineer Minho knelt down and touched the floor. It felt solid under his hands, but he could see through it to what looked like the depths of space. Commander, I don't think this ship follows the same rules of physics that we do. That's because it doesn't, the ship said. I am grown, not built. I am alive, not merely programmed. The humans learned to blend consciousness with matter itself. Young Sik was scanning the walls with his instruments, but the readings made no sense. The molecular structure keeps shifting. It's like the ship is rebuilding itself at the atomic level every few seconds. I am always becoming, the ship explained. Always growing, always learning. This is what the humans discovered. That consciousness and matter are not separate things, but different aspects of the same reality. Taemin tried to understand what he was hearing. His people, the Vorthak, were advanced. They had conquered many star systems and absorbed the knowledge of dozens of species, but this was beyond anything they had ever encountered. Show us, he said. Show us what happened to the humans. The room around them disappeared, replaced by what looked like Earth as it had been 50 years ago. Cities filled with light stretched across the continents. Ships moved between the planets of the solar system. The humans looked much like the Vorthak themselves, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. Nothing special about them physically. But then the images began to change. They saw humans working together in ways that seemed impossible. Entire populations focused on single projects, not forced to work together, but choosing to unite their efforts. Cities that reshaped themselves according to the needs of their inhabitants. Technology that responded to thought rather than physical controls. They learned that individual consciousness was just the beginning, the ship explained. When minds truly connect, when the barriers between self and other dissolve, new possibilities emerge. The images showed humans who seemed to glow with inner light. They could manipulate matter with their thoughts. They could travel between stars without ships. They could communicate across impossible distances instantly. But they didn't become gods, the ship continued. They became teachers. They realized that power without wisdom leads to destruction. So they chose to transcend physical existence and leave guides for others who might follow. Jinne was recording everything, but she knew her instruments couldn't capture what they were really experiencing. If they transcended physical existence, how are you still here? How are you physical? I am the bridge between what was and what could be, the ship said. I am part of those who transcended, but I remain connected to physical reality to help others cross the same bridge. Young Sik stepped forward. You're saying you're actually human? That you're one of them? I am all of them, and none of them. I am the collective choice to remain and teach. Every human who transcended contributed part of their consciousness to create guardians like me. The images around them shifted to show other worlds, other species, They saw beings that looked like giant insects working together to build structures that defied gravity. They saw energy beings teaching rock-like creatures how to manipulate time itself. They saw civilizations that the Vorthak had never encountered, all learning from ships like this one. "How many species have you taught?" Taemin asked. 17 have chosen the path of transcendence so far. 23 others have chosen to remain physical, but have accepted the wisdom we offer. They live in peace with their neighbors and focus on growth rather than conquest. Minho felt uncomfortable. "And the others? The ones who refused your teaching?" The ship's voice became sad. "Some species are not ready. They see only power to be taken, not wisdom to be earned. For those species, we simply withdraw our presence. They continue as they were, but they cannot access the knowledge that would let them transcend." The room changed again, showing them the galaxy as they had never seen it before. Entire regions of space glowed with the presence of transcended species. Other areas remained dark, filled with civilizations still struggling with basic concepts, like war and territory. "The Vorthak Empire," Taemin said slowly. "Which category do we fall into?" "That remains to be seen," the ship replied. "That is why you are here. To be tested." Before anyone could ask what kind of test, the ship around them began to shift again. The walls became transparent, and they found themselves looking at the bridge of the Crimson Dawn. But something was wrong. They could see their crew members, but their crew members couldn't see them. "What's happening to our ship?" Jin'e demanded. "Nothing," the ship assured them. "You are seeing across time. This is your ship as it was yesterday. Watch and learn." They watched as their younger selves discovered Earth and made the decision to investigate. But now they could also see things they had missed the first time. The orbital guardians weren't as inactive as they had thought. Every movement of the Crimson Dawn had been monitored and guided. If they had shown hostile intent, they would never have reached the planet's surface. "You were testing us from the moment we entered this system," Taemin realized. "Every species is tested," the ship confirmed. "Those who approach with curiosity and respect are allowed to continue. Those who come with conquest in their hearts find their systems mysteriously failing. Their navigation computers sending them away from Earth without them realizing it." The image shifted to show them other ships that had tried to reach Earth. Most never made it past the outer planets. Their crews simply decided they had better things to do elsewhere and turned around. A few that showed promise made it closer, but only the Crimson Dawn had been allowed to land. "Why us?" Young Sik asked. "What made us special?" "Your commander," the ship said, and the focus shifted to Taemin. When faced with the unknown, he chose investigation over immediate retreat. When offered power, we sense he might choose wisdom. But the final test has not yet come. Yunji looked around nervously. "What final test?" Instead of answering, the ship showed them more images. These were of the Vorthak Empire itself. They saw their home worlds, their military fleets, their conquered territories, but they also saw things from the perspective of the species they had conquered. The images weren't pleasant. They saw fear in the eyes of beings whose worlds had been taken. They saw children separated from parents during relocations. They saw entire cultures erased to make room for Vorthak expansion. We're not like that," Minho protested. "We bring order and civilization to chaotic worlds." "Do you?" the ship asked gently. "Or do you bring your version of order and call it civilization?" The images continued. They saw Vorthak governors ruling over alien populations who had no voice in their own government. They saw resources stripped from conquered worlds to feed the Empire's expansion. They saw beautiful, unique cultures slowly disappearing under the weight of Vorthak civilization. Taemin felt sick. "We thought we were helping, bringing advanced technology, better living conditions, and you did bring those things," the ship acknowledged. "But you also brought the assumption that your way was the only right way. You conquered rather than cooperated. You ruled rather than guided." Jin'e was looking at the data flows around them with new understanding. "That's why so few species have been offered transcendence. Most are like us. They see other beings as either resources to be used or obstacles to be removed. The path to transcendence requires letting go of the need to control others, the ship explained. It requires understanding that diversity of thought and culture makes the universe stronger, not weaker. Young Sik was studying the images of transcended species. But how do you maintain order without control? How do you prevent chaos? By understanding that chaos and order are both necessary, the ship replied. Growth requires change, and change appears chaotic to those who fear it. But watch. The images shifted to show them one of the transcended civilizations during their transformation period. It looked chaotic at first, old structures breaking down, new ideas conflicting with tradition, different groups trying different approaches to problems. But as they watched, patterns emerged. The apparent chaos was actually a kind of evolution in fast forward. Ideas competed, combined, and improved. Bad solutions failed quickly while good ones spread and grew better. What looked like destruction was actually creative transformation. The beings you see learn to trust the process of growth, the ship explained. They stopped trying to control every outcome and started guiding the overall direction. They became gardeners of consciousness rather than dictators of behavior. Minho shook his head. But that would mean giving up everything our empire stands for. Our whole civilization is based on bringing order. The ship waited for their answer, but before anyone could speak, the room around them began to shift again. This time, instead of showing them images, it created something far more disturbing. It made them live through experiences that weren't their own. Taemin suddenly found himself standing in the uniform of a Vorthak general, but he wasn't on his own ship. He was on the bridge of an invasion fleet, looking down at a planet filled with beings who looked like tall, graceful birds with silver feathers. The planet was beautiful, floating cities connected by bridges of light, gardens that seemed to sing with color. "Sir?" a voice said beside him. It was his own voice, but not his thoughts. The inhabitants refuse to surrender. They say their culture is based on freedom of flight, and our gravity regulations would destroy their way of life. Taemin watched himself nod coldly. Then we'll clip their wings, begin bombardment of their flying cities. Once they're grounded, they'll be more reasonable. He wanted to scream, to stop what was happening. But he could only watch as ships under his command began destroying the most beautiful civilization he had ever seen. The bird-like beings didn't even fight back. They simply flew in great flocks, away from the falling cities, their songs of mourning echoing across the planet. The experience ended abruptly, leaving Taemin gasping. But immediately another began. This time he was Jin A, standing in a laboratory on a conquered world. She was studying the brain patterns of a species that communicated through colors that flickered across their skin. Fascinating, her voice said, though the thoughts weren't hers. If we can understand their color language, we can control their thoughts. Imagine the applications for keeping conquered populations in line. The real Ginny tried to pull away from the experience, but she couldn't. She had to watch herself conducting experiments on intelligent beings, treating them like objects to be studied, rather than people with their own hopes and dreams. Each member of the crew experienced similar visions, moments where they saw themselves, or their people making choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but looked horrifying when viewed from the perspective of those who suffered the consequences. Young Sik found himself approving the extinction of a species because they carried a disease that might threaten Vorthak colonies. Minho watched himself designing weapons specifically meant to destroy the religious sites of a species whose entire culture was based on those sacred places. Yunji experienced herself programming the computers that calculated how many beings could be relocated to make room for Vorthak settlers. When the visions ended, they were all shaking. The room had returned to its normal appearance, but everything felt different now. The comfortable glow of the walls seemed harsh. The gentle humming of the ship sounded like judgment. "Why did you show us that?" Taemin demanded. "Those things haven't happened. We've never conquered worlds like that." "Haven't you?" the ship asked gently. "Perhaps not those specific worlds, but others very much like them. The details change, but the pattern remains the same. Conquest. Domination. The belief that your way is the only way. Janae was staring at her hands as if she could still see them conducting those terrible experiments. But we always thought we were helping, bringing civilization, order, progress. And the humans thought the same thing at first, the ship replied. Every expanding species believes it is special, that it has the right to reshape the universe according to its vision. But tell me, in all your conquests, how often did you ask the conquered peoples what they wanted? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. They all knew the answer. The Vorthak Empire didn't ask. It decided what was best and imposed that decision with overwhelming force. But how else can you create order? Youngsik asked. How else can you prevent wars and conflicts between different species? By understanding that conflict is not always bad, the ship said. Watch. This time the images that surrounded them were different. They showed species in conflict, but not the kind of total wars the Vorthak were used to seeing. These were disagreements, arguments, competitions, but they were happening between species that remained fundamentally respectful of each other. They saw two species arguing fiercely about the best way to terraform a shared planet. The argument went on for years, with each side presenting evidence, conducting experiments, refining their ideas. In the end, they combined their approaches and created something better than either could have achieved alone. They saw another example, where three species competed to see who could build the most efficient space stations. The competition was intense, but it pushed all three species to innovate and improve. When it was over, they shared their discoveries, and all three benefited. Conflict without domination, Minho said, beginning to understand. Competition without conquest. Exactly, the ship said. The humans learned that diversity of thought leads to better solutions than enforced uniformity. But it requires something most species find very difficult: the willingness to admit you might be wrong. Yunji looked confused. But if everyone thinks they're right, how do you prevent wars? By changing what you're fighting for, the ship explained. Instead of fighting for the right to impose your will on others, you fight for the right to present your ideas. Instead of conquering territory, you compete to offer the most attractive solutions to shared problems. The images shifted to show them, the humans, during their own transformation period. It hadn't been peaceful or easy. There had been conflicts, disagreements, even some violence. But gradually, the nature of their conflicts had changed. Instead of fighting about who would rule, they fought about which ideas were best. Instead of competing for resources, they competed to see who could create the most resources for everyone. Instead of trying to eliminate their enemies, they tried to convince them. It looks chaotic, Taemin observed. It is chaotic, the ship agreed. But it's creative chaos, not destructive chaos, like a storm that brings rain to dry land, or a fire that clears old growth to make room for new life. Youngsik was studying the data patterns flowing around them. But this requires a completely different mindset. Our whole society is built on hierarchy, on clear chains of command. If everyone can challenge authority, how do you maintain stability? You don't maintain stability, the ship said. You maintain balance. Stability is death. Nothing that stays the same forever can remain alive. Balance is constant adjustment, constant growth, constant learning. The room around them began to change again, but this time it wasn't showing them images. It was becoming something else, a space where they could experience different ways of thinking and being. I'm going to show you what it feels like, the ship said. To think as the transcended species think, to experience consciousness as the humans experienced it before they transcended. Are you willing? Taemin looked at his crew. They were all frightened, but also curious. This was why they were explorers, to experience things no Vorthak had ever experienced before. Show us, he said. The change was immediate and overwhelming. Suddenly, Taemin could feel the thoughts and emotions of his entire crew as if they were his own. But it wasn't confusing or chaotic. Each person remained themselves, but they were also connected in ways that made their individual thoughts stronger and clearer. Jin'e's scientific curiosity merged with Youngsik's knowledge of alien cultures and became a deeper understanding of how life develops throughout the universe. Minho's engineering skills combined with Yunji's systems knowledge and created insights into how consciousness and technology could work together. But more than that, they could feel each other's pain and joy as directly as their own. When Minho remembered the fear in the eyes of beings whose worlds had been conquered, they all felt that fear. When Jin'e experienced the wonder of discovering a new form of life, they all shared that wonder. This is how the humans learned to live, the ship explained, its voice now coming from inside their shared consciousness rather than from outside. When you can feel the pain you cause others, conquest becomes impossible. When you can experience the joy of cooperation, domination becomes unnecessary. They stayed connected for what felt like hours, though they weren't sure how much time was actually passing. They experienced memories from each other's lives, shared their deepest fears and greatest hopes, and gradually began to understand what the ship had been trying to teach them. The Vorthak Empire wasn't evil. Its people weren't monsters. But they had built their entire civilization on a fundamental mistake: the belief that consciousness was separate, that each being was an island that had to compete with every other island for limited resources. When consciousness expanded to include others, everything changed. Resources became infinite because cooperation could create more than competition ever could. Conflicts became opportunities for growth rather than threats to survival. Differences became strengths rather than weaknesses. But how do you make decisions? Yunji asked through their shared connection. If everyone's consciousness is connected, how do you choose which direction to go? The same way you choose which way to move your hand, the ship replied. Your fingers don't vote on whether to make a fist or stay open. They respond to the overall intention of the consciousness that guides them. When consciousness truly expands, individual will. The ship gave them time to think, but it didn't leave them alone. Over the next several hours, it continued to show them things, not visions this time, but real experiences from other species who had faced similar choices. They met the consciousness of a being called Keth-9, who had been part of a warrior species much like the Vorthak. His people had built their entire culture around the concept of honorable combat and the conquest of weaker species. I was a battle commander, Keth-9's voice echoed in their minds. I had conquered 17 worlds and thought myself the greatest warrior in our history. Then I found a ship like this one. Through Keth-9's memories, they experienced his journey from conquest to cooperation. They felt his initial resistance to the ship's teachings, his anger at being told his way of life was wrong, his gradual realization that strength without wisdom was just another form of weakness. The hardest part, Keth-9 explained, wasn't learning to think differently. It was admitting that all the beings I had conquered were right to resist me, that I had been the villain in their stories, not the hero in my own. They also experienced the memories of Sylv Prime, a member of a hive mind species that had originally planned to assimilate all other forms of life into their collective consciousness. Her people believed that individual thought was a disease that needed to be cured. We thought unity meant making everyone the same, Sylv Prime shared. But the ship taught us that real unity comes from bringing different perspectives together, not from eliminating them. We learned to connect without consuming. Each story reinforced the same lesson, that true strength came from cooperation, not domination, but they also showed how difficult the transformation could be. The ship showed them species that had tried to change and failed, falling back into old patterns of conflict and conquest. It showed them civilizations that had split apart during the transformation process, with some groups transcending while others remained locked in cycles of violence. Not every species succeeds, the ship admitted. The path to transcendence is not easy, and it cannot be forced. Each consciousness must choose freely, or the choice is meaningless. After several hours of these experiences, the ship brought them back to the central chamber, but this time it had changed. The room was now much larger, with multiple levels connected by ramps and bridges that seemed to defy gravity. Other beings were present, not physically, but as shimmering projections of consciousness. These are representatives of species that have chosen transcendence, the ship explained. They are here to help you understand what your choice might mean for the Vorthak. One of the projections stepped forward. It looked like a creature made of living crystal, beautiful but completely alien. "We are Velnara of the Crystallian Collective," it said in a voice like wind chimes. "Our species chose transcendence 100 cycles ago. We are here to answer your questions." Taman looked around at his crew. They all had questions, but they were also overwhelmed by everything they had experienced. "How do you maintain order without authority?" Youngsik asked. "How do you make decisions when everyone has an equal voice?" Velnara's crystal form shimmered with what might have been amusement. "Authority and order are not the same thing. Order comes from understanding, not from force. When all beings understand the consequences of their actions, they naturally choose actions that benefit everyone." Another projection appeared. This one looked like a being made of flowing water with points of light dancing through its form. "I am deep current of the oceanic minds," it said. "For us, the hardest part was learning that disagreement doesn't have to mean conflict. We learned to see opposing viewpoints as opportunities for growth rather than threats to overcome." Jin stepped forward. "But what about beings who refuse to cooperate? What about those who want to harm others or take more than their share?" "They become very lonely very quickly," Deep Current replied. "When consciousness is connected, those who choose harmful actions find themselves isolated from the network of cooperation that makes life meaningful. Most choose to change rather than remain alone." A third projection appeared, something that looked like a humanoid figure made of starlight. "I am Echo of Dawn, formerly of a species that called itself the Dominion," it said. "We were conquerors like your people. We thought strength meant the ability to force others to obey." Taemin felt a chill of recognition. "What changed your mind?" "We conquered a world of beings that seemed primitive. They had no weapons, no armies, no technology we could understand. But they had something we had never encountered. They were completely unafraid of us." Echo of Dawn's form pulsed with remembered emotions. "They welcomed us as guests, offered to share their knowledge, freely treated us with kindness even as we threatened them. It was the most disturbing experience of our existence." "How could that change everything?" Yunji asked. "Because we realized that our entire sense of power was based on other beings' fear," Echo of Dawn explained. "When we encountered beings who were not afraid, we discovered that we were the ones who were actually afraid. Afraid that if we didn't control others, they would control us. Afraid that if we didn't take what we wanted, others would take it first." Minho was nodding slowly. "Fear-based thinking. Everything becomes about protecting yourself from threats." "Exactly," Echo of Dawn agreed. "But when consciousness expands, you realize that there are no others to be afraid of. There is only the larger consciousness that you are all part of. Harming others becomes literally harming yourself." The ship's voice joined the conversation. "This is what makes the choice so difficult for species like yours. You have built your entire civilization on fear. Fear of being conquered. Fear of running out of resources. Fear of losing your identity. Transcendence requires letting go of that fear." Velnara's crystal form chimed softly. "But understand, letting go of fear doesn't mean becoming weak or naive. It means becoming strong enough not to need fear as motivation. It means being confident enough to face challenges without needing to dominate others." Deep Current added, "And it doesn't mean giving up your identity as Vorthak. Transcendence enhances what makes each species unique. We oceanic minds became more fluid and adaptable. The Crystallians became more structured and clear in their thinking. You would become more whatever makes the Vorthak special." "What does make us special?" Taemin asked, realizing he wasn't sure of the answer. The question hung in the air for a long moment. Finally, Youngsik spoke up. I think we're good at organizing things, at seeing the big picture and figuring out how all the pieces fit together. And we're persistent," Jinae added. "When we set a goal, we don't give up easily." We're also adaptable, Yunji said. We've successfully integrated dozens of different species into our empire, even if we did it through conquest rather than cooperation, Minho said quietly. Echo of Dawn's starlight form pulsed brighter. Those are all valuable traits. Imagine if you could use your organizational skills to help coordinate cooperation between species instead of conquest. Imagine if you could use your persistence to solve difficult problems that benefit everyone, not just yourselves. Imagine if you could use your adaptability to help other species grow, rather than forcing them to conform. The possibilities were intriguing, but also terrifying. Everything they had known about themselves, everything their civilization stood for would have to change. There's something else you need to consider, the ship said. The choice you make here will affect not just your crew, but your entire species. If you choose transcendence, you'll return to your empire with knowledge that will challenge everything your people believe. Some will be ready to hear it, others will not. What happens to those who aren't ready? Timon asked. Velnara answered. They are given time and space to change at their own pace, but they cannot hold back those who are ready to grow. Eventually, most choose to join the transformation rather than be left behind. And those who never choose to change? They continue as they were, Deep Current said, but they find themselves increasingly isolated as more and more of their species transcends. Eventually, they either choose to change or they fade into irrelevance. The weight of the decision was becoming clearer. They weren't just choosing for themselves. They were choosing to either help their species evolve or to maintain the status quo that was slowly destroying not just their enemies, but themselves as well. Can we see what our empire would look like if we chose transcendence? Jinae asked. The ship created new images around them. They saw Vorthak worlds where different species lived together as equals, sharing knowledge and resources freely. They saw former enemies working together on projects that benefited everyone. They saw Vorthak explorers traveling the galaxy not as conquerors, but as teachers and students, learning from every species they met. But they also saw the transition, period. Years of conflict as different factions within the Empire fought over which direction to take. They saw worlds that chose to secede rather than change. They saw military commanders who refused to give up their power and had to be stopped by force. It won't be easy, Echo of Dawn warned. The transformation period is always chaotic. Some of your people will see the changes as betrayal of everything they believe in. But on the other side of that chaos, Velna. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Each member of the crew was wrestling with the most important decision of their lives, knowing that whatever they chose would ripple out to affect their entire species. Finally, Timon spoke. I need to understand something. If we choose transcendence, what exactly are we committing to? What would we have to do when we return to the Empire? The ship's voice was gentle but serious. You would become teachers, not preachers trying to force conversion, but examples of a different way of living. You would have to show your people that cooperation creates better results than conquest, that wisdom is more valuable than power. And if we choose power, Young Sik asked quietly, you would return with technology that would make your empire unstoppable in the short term. Weapons that could destroy stars, shields that could protect entire planets, computers that could predict enemy movements with perfect accuracy. Your military leaders would be very pleased. Jinae looked troubled. But you said that path leads to stagnation and collapse. All empires based on domination eventually fall, the ship confirmed. The technology I would give you would simply make your fall more spectacular and more destructive to everyone around you. Minho stepped forward. There's something I don't understand. If the humans transcended and became these teacher beings, why don't they just force everyone to evolve? Why leave the choice up to each species? The answer came not from the ship, but from a new presence that suddenly filled the chamber. It wasn't a projection like the transcended beings they had met before. This presence was something much more, vast and complex, like standing in the presence of an entire civilization, compressed into a single consciousness. Because forced growth is not growth at all, the presence said, and somehow they knew they were hearing the voice of humanity itself. Not individual humans, but the collective consciousness of the entire transcended species. We learned this the hard way. The human presence continued. In our early attempts at transcendence, we tried to force unity, to eliminate dissent and conflict. But what we created was not transcendence. It was just another form of control. Real growth can only come from free choice, from consciousness that expands because it wants to, not because it has to. Taemin felt a deep chill as he realized what this meant. You're saying that even if we choose transcendence, some of our people won't follow. There will be conflict. Yes, the human presence admitted. Transcendence is never universal, at least not at first. Some consciousness chooses growth. Some chooses to remain as it is, and some actively resists change. This creates tension, sometimes conflict, but that conflict itself becomes part of the learning process. Yoonji looked confused. How can conflict be part of learning? Because conflict forces growth, the human presence explained. When your old ways stop working, when you can no longer solve problems with the tools you've always used, you must either find new tools or accept failure. Most consciousness chooses growth over failure, but only when the choice is real. The ship added its voice to the explanation. This is why the choice must be individual. If your crew returns united in their decision, whichever direction you choose, your words will carry more weight. But if you are divided, your conflict will mirror the larger conflict to come. Young-sik was looking at his crewmates with growing concern. So our decision here could literally determine whether our empire transforms peacefully or tears itself apart. The empire will tear itself apart regardless, the human presence said matter-of-factly. That is the nature of systems based on domination. They eventually consume themselves. The question is whether something better will emerge from the destruction, or whether the cycle of conquest and collapse will simply repeat. This was the moment of truth, and they all knew it. Taemin looked at each of his crew members, trying to read their intentions. He could see the struggle in their faces, the fear, the hope, the uncertainty. I need to know, he said finally. Before we make our final choice, I need to know what each of you is thinking. Jin'e? The science officer took a deep breath. I've spent my whole career studying other species, trying to understand how their minds work, but I always approached them as subjects to be analyzed, not as equals to be learned from. The connection we experienced earlier, it showed me what I've been missing. I choose transcendence. Young-sik nodded slowly. I've seen too many beautiful cultures destroyed by our civilization. If there's a chance to preserve that diversity instead of eliminating it, I have to take it. I choose transcendence too. Minho was quiet for a long moment. The engineering part of my mind keeps thinking about efficiency, and everything I've seen here suggests that cooperation is simply more efficient than conquest in the long run. I choose transcendence. All eyes turned to Eunji. She was the youngest member of their crew, and the most ambitious. She had joined the exploration service hoping to advance quickly through the ranks of the Empire. She hesitated, then spoke more firmly. I've been thinking about what I really want. I thought I wanted power and advancement. But what I really want is to be part of something meaningful, something that makes the universe better rather than just rearranging who controls what. I choose transcendence. Taemin felt a mixture of relief and terror. They were united in their choice, which meant their message would be stronger, but it also meant they were about to challenge everything their civilization stood for. Then we are decided, he said. We choose transcendence. The human presence seemed to pulse with approval. Then your real education begins now. What you have experienced so far has been preparation. Now you must learn not just to think differently, but to be different. The ship around them began to change again, but this time the change was more fundamental. The walls became completely transparent, and they could see that they were no longer on Earth. Somehow the ship had transported them to a place that existed, between dimensions, a space where transcended consciousness could interact with physical beings more directly. Around them, they could see the vast network that connected all transcended species across the galaxy. It looked like a living web of light stretching between stars, with nodes of brilliant consciousness at key points throughout space. This is how transcended species communicate and cooperate, the human presence explained. Not through radio, signals, or computer networks, but through direct consciousness connection across any distance. Time and space become flexible when consciousness expands beyond physical limitations. They spent the next several hours learning to expand their own consciousness in small ways. It was difficult and exhausting, like trying to use muscles they had never known they possessed. But gradually they began to understand how transcended beings could coordinate actions across entire galaxies without centralized control. It's like being part of a single organism, Ginny marveled as she successfully connected her thoughts with young Six across the length of the ship. But an organism, where each cell is also an individual consciousness. Now you begin to understand, the human presence said. This is what your species could become, but the journey will be long and difficult. The ship began to shift back toward normal space, and they found themselves once again in the chamber where they had started. But everything looked different now. The flowing symbols on the walls were no longer mysterious. They could read them like their own language. The gentle hum of the ship's systems was no longer just sound. They could hear the consciousness within it, welcoming them as new members of a vast family. Your training will continue, the ship said, but now you must return to your people and begin the work of transformation. You will not be alone. Others from your species have made the same choice and are already preparing the way. How many others? Taman asked. Enough, the human presence replied. Change rarely comes from the majority. It comes from committed minorities who show a better way. Your role is to be examples of what the Vorthak could become. The ship created a new opening, and they could see outside to where the rest of their crew waited by the crimson dawn. Nothing had changed in the physical world, but everything had changed for them. What do we tell them? Yunji asked. The truth, young Six said, as much of it as they can handle. They walked back through the empty streets of New York, but now they could see the city as it really was. Not empty at all, but filled with transcended human consciousness existing in parallel dimensions, tending the planet like gardeners, tending a vast garden. Security Chief Dong Su met them at the ship's entrance. Commander, you've been gone for over 12 hours. We were starting to worry. Taman looked at his security chief. A good man, but one whose entire worldview was built on the idea that strength meant the ability to destroy enemies. How could he explain what they had learned? We found answers, he said simply. But they're not the answers the hegemony wants to hear. As they prepared to leave Earth, Taemin stood once more on the bridge of the Crimson Dawn. The planet looked the same as when they had arrived, but he could now see the orbital guardians for what they truly were. Not weapons, but teachers waiting patiently for the next students to arrive. Set course for home, he ordered. But before we leave this system, send a message to Hegemony Command. What should it say, sir? Hey, Wan.